all the business out of the way, let's get to the exciting part. Tonight's speaker, Amy Jo Kim. I'm super excited to have her here. I saw her speak quite a while ago, and then we both were just speaking at the Lean Startup Conference. And I said, hey, I'd love to have you come speak at our meetup, and she agreed. She's a game designer and a startup coach. She's worked on, the list of amazing games she's worked on is too long to put on the slide, but it's like Rock Band, The Sims, and other apps and products like Netflix and eBay. She did write a book, like I said, Community Building for the Web. Her specialty is in social game design. She has, the academic chops to back it up with a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. And like I said, her masterclass and workshops are under Getting to Alpha. We'll be giving away 2 of those, like I said, so make sure you tweet. You can find her on Twitter there, or amyjokim.com, or gettingtoalpha.com. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Amy Jo.
Welcome. I'm so glad you're all here. It's so great to see old friends and new friends and clients and future clients and people that have inspired me. So thank you all for coming. It means a lot to me, and one of the things I'm hoping to get out of this is to learn from you what kind of problems you're struggling with that can be made better and solved with game thinking. So I'm curious if you relate to any of these issues. Do you ever feel like you really wish you could accelerate your early design process, make things go faster? Do you ever feel like input on what you're doing is coming from all sides, and it's tough to filter it, to know who to pay attention to know where to use your precious resources, and what to filter out? Do you ever feel like you have a great, expansive, compelling vision, and you know you need to make an MVP, a stripped-down, simple MVP? But it's a struggle. It's tough. So full disclosure, I have struggled with every one of these issues, and I continue to struggle with them on projects, which is why they're interesting problems to solve. I have a suspicion that we're actually all here, product managers, engineers, designers, CEOs, executives, coaches. We're here because we don't want to build shit that people don't use. We want to build shit that people love. Pardon my language. That just came out. We do. I do. Do you? Do you want to build shit that people love? I do. When I worked on, as you said, all those games, that's where we started out. Now, I've also worked on a lot of projects you've never heard of because they went sideways. Didn't work out. And I have some lessons learned I'm going to share with you about how to avoid that. What you're going to get tonight is actionable techniques to make a better product in less time using game thinking, which is my term for what makes games interesting in the long term, what makes them truly compelling. I'm going to share some secrets with you tonight that apply to anything you're doing. So I'm Amy Jo Kim. As guilty as charged, I have a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. I'm a recovering academic. I'm a social game designer. I've worked with amazing teams on great products. I've been an entrepreneur. I was CEO of a venture-funded startup, and I feel that pain. Any of you who are in that, been there. I was raising money in 2008. So, been there. And I'm a startup coach. I work with teams all over the world, helping them build better, faster products. Some of the things I've worked on span gaming and marketplaces. What they all have in common is they're all systems, usually interactive, complex systems. But what I've learned working with these great companies and really awesome teams and great brands is that fun means different things to different people. I want to tell you a story before I launch into the 4 tips on how to apply game thinking to your product. I'll tell you a story about when I was a kid and give you a glimpse into my journey. And I think you can relate to that through your own journey. When I was a kid, the thing I most loved to do was play music. I would ride in the car with my parents, and Beatles songs would come on the radio. And I would go back and pick them out on the piano, so my parents said, oh, we'll get her piano lessons. They did, and I loved it, and I was good. So they said, oh, you should go to competitions. And I hated that. I hated the thing I loved turning into a competition. I hated that the people that I was friends with at piano lessons suddenly were my enemies. I just hated it. So I stopped playing music for 10 years. The thing I loved most in the world, I stopped doing it for 10 years. Maybe you've had that kind of experience once. But then, after college, I was on a beach in Greece, backpacking through Europe, and there were some people around a campfire that couldn't speak English. And I couldn't speak their language, but one of them had a guitar, and I knew how to play guitar. I knew a few chords, and I knew Beatles songs. So we stayed up all night long singing Beatles songs around the campfire with people that didn't speak my language, but in fact they did speak my language. And that was transformative. I had found another way to play, and ever since then I've been in bands, played music professionally, semi-professionally. Currently, I'm the bassist at our temple at the shul. I play once a month at the services because I'm a working mom. But I really love playing in a band with other people, and I love creating something together with other people that you can't create on your own. So that was really the roots of my love of co-op gaming. And since then, I pursued community design. Many of you might know me through community building on the web. And then social game design, working on Covet Fashion, Happify, Ultima Online, The Sims, eBay, and Rock Band. And that one, Rock Band, that was a pivotal moment for me in my journey. I got a phone call on a sunny September day. I remember it. I was in my house in Half Moon Bay, and this gentleman, Alex Rogopoulos, he's the CEO of Harmonix. He called me and he said, so I'm coming out to the Bay Area and we need a lead designer on this crazy idea we have, which is people with no musical talent are going to play plastic instruments and feel like they're in a band. And I said, that, really? You're going to do that? And he said, yeah, we're going to do that. And I wasn't able to move to Boston and take the lead designer role, but I did participate for the first 9 months of the project and helped bring it to life. That was pivotal. Bringing Rock Band to life showed me and taught me what it was like to work with a crack team of excellent designers, engineers, and producers, product managers, when they were very, very unsure of what they were building right at the start. And what we created together became the Rock Band franchise. So that was great. I learned a lot. I worked on more breakthrough hits, meaning products that created their own genre. Lumosity, Happify, Covet Fashion. How many of you know Covet Fashion? Yes! I love Covet Fashion. It's a really cool game. You should check it out. And I learned a lot about what game thinking is and what it isn't. And I'm going to share a few actionable tips with you tonight. I'm going to share 4 strategies for better, faster product design. The first is to design an experience that's created to evolve over time. It doesn't mean you build the whole thing up front, but you think of your experience as designing over time. This is getting into what Steve Jobs was talking about when he said design is about how it works, not just how it looks. This is about how it works over time. One of the fundamental principles of game design is the experience evolves over time. So I use this 4-stage model to help answer the question, what is my customer's end-to-end experience? There's a lot of ways to answer that. Customer journey maps, all kinds of things. I'm into shortcuts. My clients are startups with burn rate in a hurry. So I find that you can use shortcuts with specific moments in the customer journey that help you map the experience and identify the core systems at the heart of what you're doing. Discovery is the first stage. That's for visitors. Is this for me? That's the question you're answering. Onboarding is the second phase. That's where you're learning the ropes. Habit building is the third phase. That's for regulars. A lot of people confuse onboarding and habit building. They're very different. And people have different needs during that phase. And mastery is for enthusiasts, experts, and your passionate customers. Mastery is the thing that's most missing from most web and app design, really designing a system that moves people towards some sense of mastery. In order to have mastery, you need skill building. So let's look at Slack. How many of you are familiar with Slack? All right. How many of you love Slack? Okay, not everyone. Slack is a really interesting product. Let's take a look at what its end-to-end customer experience is. Well, we talked about discovery. Discovery is where you first come upon it. One of the things that differentiated Slack from many of its competitors was that it came in through social discovery. How many of you were told to use Slack by your IT department? How many of you discovered Slack through a friend or colleague? Exactly. Social discovery. That's much more game-like than enterprise-like. Onboarding is for newbies. How many of you remember the first time you talked to the Slack bot? So that's, how many of you have ever played a game where you learned how to do the most rudimentary things in the game by interacting with a bot or character? That's right out of game design, that kind of gesture. And naturally, those of you who know the backstory of Slack know that Slack was the homegrown tool of a bunch of people doing distributed game design of a cooperative, massively multiplayer game called Glitch. But Slack's onboarding is really interesting and I think very sophisticated, because in gaming, one of the things that we know and we've learned is that even if you're building a great multiplayer experience, like I work on multiplayer games, that's my specialty, you want to have a single player onboarding experience because it's easier and less embarrassing to make mistakes if you're just interacting with a bot than if you're thrown in an arena with a bunch of people who know more than you do. So in gaming, we often talk about onboarding. We're going to have the single player design part, and at this point you have touch points with multiplayers, and then later in the experience, boom, you're in the multiplayer experience. And Slack, even in its rudimentary way, absolutely embraces that style of game thinking. Habit building is for regulars. What is the daily habit of Slack? You check in, you read your notifications, you see what people are doing. Maybe somebody posted a stupid GIF. You know, maybe there's some new emojis. So earlier I mentioned skill building as a key differentiator. So Slack's interesting because what is the skill building built into that habit loop, that habit building moment? It's customization. Slack is an extensible environment that as you get better at it, you can customize it more and more. You can add emojis. You can customize the channel if you own it. You can go so far as to integrate your apps with the API. Customization all the way through. There's something to get better at. Which leads into mastery. The core of what makes Slack interesting to master is the ability to customize it. And those who master that get new opportunities that open up, not because of game mechanics and unlocks, but because of skill building and knowledge. So Slack, in that sense, evolves to match your skill level. And if you think about those, they didn't use this framework necessarily to design it, but the way in which it came about, which I'll tell you about later, absolutely followed the path of really strong game thinking. It's no accident that Slack is so powerful and yet so simple. So the second idea is to find the fun in your core loop. Now let me unpack that. Start with this quote from Ralph Koster. How many of you know who Ralph Koster is? He wrote The Theory of Fun. He's a game designer. He actually hired me for one of my first design jobs on Ultima Online. And one of the quotes I love from him is that fun is another word for learning, and it's really true. That's something, those of you who know about self-determination theory know that learning and mastery are intrinsically motivating to us humans. The thing about fun, and even about learning and mastery, is that it means different things to different kinds of people. One of the most fundamental is the difference between enjoying the thrill of competition and enjoying the being involved in something larger than yourself of collaboration. Most people enjoy both, but people tend to lean one way or another. And knowing this about your audience is critical for driving early engagement. So let's do a quick Game Theory 101. What is a game? Well, here's a definition that was from a textbook written by Eric Zimmerman and Katie Salen in 1995 that talks about goals and an end state and classic definition of game. Well, that turns out that that definition really works for what are called zero-sum games. And those are games where we're opponents. If I win, you lose. There is a limited resource that is divided up among the winners. And that's how the game is framed, zero-sum games. Any head-to-head competition, any rank-ordered competition like the Olympics, most gambling games, although you're playing against the house, war simulations, chess, polo, Go, all zero-sum games. Beloved the world over. But there's this other kind of game. It first struck me when I was working on The Sims. I had read that book. I do my homework as a game designer. And we were working on The Sims, and it didn't fit the definition of a game in the classic game design book. There's no end state in The Sims. So I came up with a different definition just to describe what we were doing, which is a structured experience that's fun, built around rules and goals, which is much closer to a non-zero-sum game. A non-zero-sum game is a game where, rather than us being framed as opponents, we're framed as partners. We win together and we lose together. It's as simple as that. That's Game Theory 101. So, what are some examples? Double Dutch, the way that girls tend to play it on the playground. You're playing together, but you're not necessarily beating each other unless you say it's a competition. Pictionary, each team in Pictionary is winning together or losing together. And that, in fact, every team sport has both cooperative and competitive dynamics, which is part of why team sports are so popular. Because in a team, you're winning together and losing together. But if you have a team competition, you also get that zero-sum excitement. A charity walk is a great example. So is a Kickstarter campaign. It's a non-zero-sum game. The more people that play, the better everybody does. So it's very important to ask yourself, what kind of fun are my customers looking for? And fun can mean different things. Fun can mean trust and security if you're doing a shopping site like Amazon. But if you have a social site of any kind, do the people playing want to be collaborators, or do they want to be competitors? See if you can find that out. That will help you not go down a lot of cul-de-sacs. So that's a little bit about finding the fun. Now I want to talk to you about in your core loop. So this is Dan Cook, who's one of my very dearest friends and a wonderful game designer at Spry Fox. And he likes to talk about, in a loop, you're learning a skill and updating your mental model. That's what leads to player delight. I think there's a lot of depth in that quote. So many of you are probably familiar with the basic operant conditioning Skinner box. How many of you know or have seen something that looks like this before? Okay. It's very common. It's very simple. My undergrad degree was in psych. I did pigeon lab. I got the pigeons to turn around with pellets. And so you have a cue, and you have some very small behavior. Usually it's not even a conscious behavior. And then some reward, and that's how you shape behavior. That is behavior modification by Skinner in a nutshell. There's a book called The Power of Habit that used exactly that model in the habit loop. If you're familiar with Neirial's hooked model, that's very, very similar. And turns out this can shape behavior. But it never leads you to player delight because it doesn't have anything to do with skill building or learning or mastery. In order to get long-term engagement, you need to make your customers more awesome at something that they care about. If you use Skinner box treatments, you can get a month or 2 months of lift. Absolutely. You can, many gamification systems do that. But if you're not really making people better at something, it's not going to drive long-term engagement. Because, as I said earlier, it's the process of learning and mastery that's actually deeply and intrinsically motivating. So here's a simplified model of a core loop. By the way, there's handouts on all your seats that includes this, and that's just for you to take notes on and take away, and I hope you continue to use the ideas. And let me take you through this now. But the key difference between a core loop and that Skinnerian habit loop is that it includes, 1, an engaging activity of some kind, and 2, some kind of feedback and progress that is designed to improve your skills. So think of this, think of your core loop as your day 21 experience. You know, not the onboarding, not where people are learning the ropes, but for whatever you're building, what's that day 21, day 30 experience that people are having? And what is it they're getting better at while they're having that experience? Let me talk a little bit about Rock Band. I was working with the team right at the start when it was an idea that everybody told us was nuts. People were like, who is going to pay $160 for a bunch of plastic instruments that clutter up your living room? You're insane. You're going to go out of business. That's what people were telling us. But we knew, because that was I give the team credit, they're a very smart team, that we actually had to, this is how game designers do it. We knew we had to find the fun in the core loop of the game. Without that, nothing else mattered. Without that, all the levels and the character design and the beautiful stuff that you know and love about Rock Band doesn't matter if it's not compelling at the heart of it. So the way we did that, here's, by the way, the Rock Band core loop. Take it apart. There's a trigger. The initial trigger is usually internal, meaning people want to do something. The trigger for Rock Band was like party time because it's a multiplayer party game, and we knew that going in. For the activity, the core activity in Rock Band is just playing a song together, 4 people playing a song together. Feedback and progress. Feedback, by the way, feedback comes before progress. Feedback is more fundamental to skill building than progress. First thing is you need feedback of if you're on the right track. So initially, when we were working on Rock Band, we had a little room in the middle of Harmonix in Boston with paper on the walls, so nobody, like a war room. And we had spit and baling wire instruments that every time I went there got better and better. And we were just banging on the core loop of making a song really, really compelling for 6 or 7 months. And I was much less sophisticated as a designer then. I was like, what about the character design? Later. What about levels? I have some idea for levels. Later. You know, I kept coming up with ideas and like, later. We got to get the core loop right. We got to get the feedback right. Those of you who have played Rock Band or Dance Central or any of Harmonix's game know how that feedback actually builds your skills. In fact, there was just a study released that showed that playing Rock Band improves normal people's music perception to the level of regular musicians. I tweeted it, so if you want to follow me, you'll see it there. But I mean, that was like this morning, it blew my mind. And yet it didn't blow my mind because I saw it when we were building the game. We brought normal people in and they played it. And even when the graphics were ugly, we could see that the feel of it was coming together. So, and then investment. So the investment is you get better. There's feedback. Then there's the metagame, which is you get to play harder songs, you get to play bigger venues, better leveling up. But the core part of it is just getting better, hitting your notes, hitting the timing better, and the joy of mastery. Now let's look at Slack. Let's look how Slack found the fun in a team collaboration tool. So here's Slack's core loop. Let me take it apart for you. There's an engaging activity tied to an internal trigger. that satisfies some urge or need. And it's very basic. It's a similar activity as checking Facebook or checking Twitter, which is read your updates. Respond to your updates. And the end state is, well, no more updates. Guess I'm done. And then the investment path is to customize your experience. There's the feedback in progress. Now, let me talk about engaged triggers. So there's many different kinds of triggers. A trigger is just a concept for something that reminds people to do something. And an engaged trigger is something that happens when people get engaged in your product. It doesn't happen during onboarding or for newbies. But an engaged trigger is like checking your notifications, checking your stats. That's an engaged trigger. That means somebody cares. They've bought into your system. They think the stats are important. So that's something when you're designing triggers that you can move toward to get deeper investment. But there's also internal triggers, which are the emotions that people feel. And then importantly, there's situational triggers. I'm going to come back to situational triggers. Those are things in the environment that structure people's day. Those are their existing habits. For instance, sitting down to dinner with your family is a situational trigger. Coming into work, grabbing a cup of coffee and chatting with people in the break room, there's a trigger. That's like a daily habit. So skill building is all about making customers more awesome. And the core loop, if you do it right, is about making those customers more skillful at something that they care about. If you want to build long-term engagement, start with a simple skill-building core loop. I'll come back to how to do that in a moment. Turns out that's exactly what Slack did. They started with a very simple tool, no onboarding, no mastery, no integration, no API stuff, just to get their work done internally. And they developed it for 3 years before it turned into a product. Third point I want to share with you is to connect early and leverage your super fans. Super fans is a gaming term, and I learned this trick from great people. And this is Gabe Newell. How many of you know who Gabe Newell is? All right, gamers. So Gabe Newell runs Valve, and they have something called Steam, which is really changing the nature of how games are digitally distributed. And this is a great quote because this is how game designers think. They think about people as game pieces. And they do, because they are, and because they're part of the game. In fact, games are really the only medium where they don't do anything or come alive unless they interact with someone. I guess you could say apps do that too, but movies are just, they'll play. But a game interacts with someone and becomes what it is through that interaction. So people are part of the game board, part of the game pieces. So super fans is shorthand for early, passionate customers who can give you valuable feedback on rough, early prototypes. Really good game designers are all over this, and I've seen up close how this changes your odds of success. So how many of you have ever heard of this, Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore? Something every product manager should certainly know about. It's quite well known. This is the story of how Geoffrey Moore, a marketer, worked with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak when the Apple was a hobbyist hit, but not a mainstream computer, and took them across the chasm from the early adopters, the hobbyists, to the early majority, mainstream people. That's what that's about. And this popularized these terms: innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. But it turns out, what's much less known is that those terms and that entire model came from a theory 30 years earlier by a guy at Bell Labs named Everett Rogers in 1961. He came up with this theory not because he was a marketer, but because he was studying data on how innovation spread through existing communities. And his data told him that there was this bell curve, and that truly innovative disruptions or products don't go directly to the early majority. They have to go through the innovators and early adopters. That's actually how they spread. And the ones that don't turn into successes. That is what his data told him. So if you want to cross that chasm and get to the mainstream, which is what Jeffrey Moore's book was all about, your job is really to find and delight a few passionate early customers and resist the urge to be distracted by the early majority, if you're innovating. So Will Wright, how many of you have heard of Will Wright? Yeah, he did The Sims. I've gotten to work with him on many projects. I learned so much from him. I love this because this really captures his approach. So the first time I saw a game designer really leverage those super fans was when I just started working on The Sims. Just like with Rockman, it was an idea. There were some of us in a room with like a one-page document and a lot of questions. And Will said, well, I have this mailing list of all the people that like SimCity and like SimEarth, and I can use them. We're like, how can you use them? They're not like our target. He's like, yeah, but they're going to build stuff, and I can release tools to them, and they can build stuff, and they can populate our beta. And like he had all these ideas about how to leverage them. And it was not manipulative. It was win-win. They thought he was a god. You know, he pulled back the curtain and let them in to the game development process in a structured way. And it turned out, it worked out okay. The Sims is the best-selling PC franchise of all time. So another way to look at this is think about solving a real problem for a small group of people, not for the everybody's, but for a specific small group. That's exactly what Slack did. They were absolutely focused on solving a real problem for their distributed team working on Glitch, this cooperative game. They were in Vancouver and San Francisco and other places. And it's hard to collaborate, especially if you're doing an MMO. I've worked on MMOs. They are a bitch. They are just so many interactive systems and unexpected consequences and economies and all that stuff. So, you know, that's where Slack came out of. So if you want to accelerate your innovation, think about how you can leverage your superfans to help you bring your early product to life faster and smarter. The fourth and last tip is to build your roadmap with game thinking. This is for you product managers, but frankly, all of us, I'm fundamentally a designer. I work on roadmaps too. We all do. We collaborate. That's the nature of the world. I love this quote from Frank Lloyd Wright because it's true. I mean, it's not just us digital designers who feel this. It goes back to the desire of lean startup. We want to know sooner if we're onto something. We want to get those signals. We want to save time and money. We want to do it at the drawing table, not on the construction site. So here's the chart. This is the punchline, really, of this whole talk. And by the way, I make this freely available. It's in all your handouts. This is mapping game thinking against your product development timeline, your roadmap. So this is how you build a game thinking roadmap. You start by focusing on habit building on your core loop. You resist the urge to focus on onboarding. Why? Because early adopters, early customers, superfans don't really need onboarding. You need to know if you're onto something. You're not going to find that out through your onboarding. You're going to find that out through your core loop, especially if it's rough. You need to bring it to life with some people who can give you real feedback. Later on, when you're getting closer to beta, you want to develop your onboarding more because you need to bring more people in. Now you may be getting into the early majority a bit. You're going to continue to develop your habit building. That's what that spiral is. And then when you get closer to launch, you focus more on discovery. One of the most damaging things I've seen teams do is get hyper-focused on, let's build a fake landing page because Lean Startup says we should, and that's the way to test product market fit. Well, looking at this chart, is very helpful. Many of my clients have used this chart to debug their team's thinking and explain to them that a fake landing page will test your marketing message. And if you want to test your marketing message, go to town. That is great. But if you want to test your core value proposition and whether your experience is going to fly and whether you found the fun in your core loop, as us game designers say, then all the time you spend on your fake landing page, that's discovery. Your fake landing page is the discovery. And that's great. But really, you should be focusing on that mostly during launch and only do enough to get people in and be able to test out that core loop. Not everybody's going to spend 7 months on their core loop like Rock Band did. But here's what I've learned. If you start there, you go further, faster. So this goes back to testing your high-risk assumptions, something that's absolutely part of game design. We call that pre-production and scoping. And in Lean Startup, they call that testing your high-risk assumptions. But I've been doing that for years in gaming because studios have budget. And they go, OK, you got 3 months to greenlight this. Let's see what you can do in 3 months. And you basically are scoping the whole thing. So you really want to find a way to focus on what your high-risk assumptions are and test those as early as possible. You also, let me go back there. One of the things that often stumbles people is they say, wait a minute, mastery, you said mastery was so important. Why is it at the end? Why are you really developing mastery there at the end during expansion? Don't you want to do all your levels earlier? Here's the thing. If you co-create mastery with your superfans, meaning if you actually engage with them early and find out what they care about, your ability to design mastery systems is going to be much more focused and much more effective. It's basic user-centered design. And usually you don't need to wait. Sometimes if I'm doing a certain kind of game, we design mastery systems earlier. But even with Rock Band, we didn't design, the rest of the team kept saying, wait, get to that later. Let's get this core loop right. So if you want to build faster, smarter products, if you want to do that thing I talked about at the beginning, accelerate your early design process, run low fidelity, high learning play tests with the right early customers. Not the early majority, but the passionate early customers or super fans. Should be a small, passionate group. So let me bring this to life with a story. A couple of years ago, I used all these techniques to work with these awesome entrepreneurs, Israeli entrepreneurs from the games industry who wanted to build something game-like, but they didn't want to gamify. They didn't, just like Slack, by the way. You guys all notice that Slack doesn't have any points or badges or any of that crap cluttering up the interface? Those guys are game designers, but they chose not to put it in there. Think about it. So same with these guys. I'll tell you the story of Happify. So I met them, same thing, when two guys, a piece of paper, we met for coffee. They're like, we had this vision. We were transformed by happiness science. We were struggling. They had an exit, and then they weren't doing anything for a year, and then they got bored. So they studied happiness science and had a holy camole transformation. And they said, okay, we want to make a game out of this, or something game-like, or something that, is compelling. And they had a lot of ideas. So we set about testing those. The challenge was to quickly build a prototype, identify our early customers, and prove the business model. These are definitely business guys. They did none of this like grow and figure it out later. So what we did was we clarified our product strategy up front. We used a bunch of techniques that are part of the Getting to Alpha system to quickly locate passionate early customers. We had 3 ideas for groups of who we thought it was going to be, and we tested all of them and then found the ones who really fit and doubled down on those. We did all of that in a few weeks. And then we had to prototype the core loop, and that was really hard because they love to do the onboarding. And there was a designer there who just, onboarding is much easier than a core loop. So, but we got the core loop going, and we learned from these. It turned out it was a lot of stay-at-home moms who used to be professional women. Those were our early adopters. They really helped us bring Happify to life. And we iterated the product many times. Here's a funny story. When we first got together, the picture that the entrepreneurs showed me of what they wanted to build looked like a tower defense game. It was 2.5D isomorphic, visual interface, and they had built a casual games studio. So they said, oh, it'll be great, and it'll be like playing a tower defense game. I'm like, maybe. So we talked to all these early adopters, all these people that were actually needed it, and we found out that most of them, contrary to being people who wanted to play a tower defense game, a big pattern we saw during research was, when I'm feeling low, what I like to do is go on Pinterest and see some beautiful images, and then I feel better. So we actually completely threw out that whole interface idea, which was hard because they were very attached to it. And we built something that looked like Pinterest. And that's when it started to take off. Happify is now the market leader in digital happiness, and they're actually licensing what they're doing to clinicians and to healthcare providers for improved mental health. So I want you to imagine getting that kind of result for your own project. So what if you could really accelerate your early development with confidence? What if you could figure out how to tune out all that noise and just laser focus on exactly the right people to listen to get product feedback on? What if you could then quickly transform those research insights, no small feat, into a simple yet compelling minimum viable product, or prototype, or first playable, or whatever you want to call it? And what if you could do all of that in a few weeks? So what I shared with you today is the beginning of you being able to do that. So here's a summary. I shared 4 strategies for faster, better product design. Design your product to evolve over time. Think it through. Don't build it all at once, but think it through. This will help you identify your core systems. 2, find the fun in your core loop. Do some audience research or customer research. Understand what kind of fun, take the hypotheses or assumptions you have about what they like and test them. Find out more. Connect with your superfans. Absorb that idea of the innovation diffusion curve. Have the discipline to really find the people that need what you want. You will know them because they say things like, when is that going to ship? Can I get an early version? Do you need beta testers? Whereas early majority people will say things like, great job, let me know when it ships. Is that impressive person I know ever using it? Let me know when they're using it. Early majority looks for social proof. Early customers and superfans have a pain point or urge or need that is burning, that has them overcome normal things that hold people back. The right early customers will go through, they will pay money, they will go through friction to get their hands on what you're doing. That's how you know you're on the path to product market fit. And 4th, build out your roadmap with game thinking. Don't be seduced by the siren song of beautiful onboarding that impresses your boss. Leave that till later. Get that core loop right. And think about, even if it's very simple, how you're making your customers more awesome, how you're building skills over time. So there's a handout that all of you should have. And any of you who didn't get it, email me and I'll send you a PDF. And that's just a few things to help you remember and to work on your own. And the thing I would love best is if all of you went and took one of these ideas and just did it. Just write something down, talk to your team, move the ball down the field. So I've been doing coaching startups for many years, but I've been coaching them online for the last couple of years. And I'm excited to let you know that I'm launching a masterclass called the Getting to Alpha Masterclass. It's online, it runs for 8 weeks, and it has all the tools in online form and all the templates and all the Mad Libs text that you need to go through this process at an accelerated rate. So step 1 is what I gave you tonight, and anything you find on the web, go use it. I give a lot of stuff away for free. If you want to do it faster, and you want guidance, and you want to save yourself and your team a bunch of time, then check out Getting to Alpha Masterclass. That will be launching in April. And later tonight, we're going to be giving away 2 seats. So here's the information to get a hold of me. If you email me, I would love to hear from you. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. If you need a PDF for your team, I'd be happy to send that. And I really appreciate your time. I really hope that you can go and supercharge your progress with these game thinking tips. Thank you. What?
Q&A?
Oh, yes, Q&A.
Well, just thanks, Amy Jo, for an awesome talk, packed a lot of advice. I just want to say, if you like these ideas, remember there's 2 masterclasses. We've had very, very few tweets. Maybe people forgot. If you're interested in taking this masterclass, an online class where you get to work with Amy Jo and work on your idea, please tweet it out now, okay? And let's do some Q&A for a little bit, and then we'll adjourn and give away some prizes. So who has a question?
This lady here.
Hi, my name is Sukanya, and the reward that's in the framework of Neer's hook model versus your feedback and progress. I'm actually struggling between the 2 frameworks. So what exactly do you think are the core differences between the 2?
Well, the key differences are pretty simple. The hook framework talks about using a reward after the smallest possible action, and that's the language of behavior modification. If what you're doing is you're trying to shape behavior by giving people rewards after they've taken tiny little actions, that's a behavior mod approach, and that's very much what is expressed there. The difference is that there's an engaging activity at the heart of this model. If you don't have an engaging activity, this model's not for you. And the other difference is that you're using feedback and progress to shape skill building. So that's different than using rewards to shape behavior. I'd be happy to talk about that. I don't know how else to explain it, but
Right.
Partly it's different because if you use the rewards to shape behavior approach, you'll tend to see short-term lift and then long-term fall off.
More questions?
There was a gentleman here and a gentleman there.
All right.
Hi, my name is Prince Arora. Quick question, is this framework applicable to all age groups, children's, adults, or is it?
It is,
applied?
and when I work with my one-on-one clients, we tweak it a lot. So it's absolutely applicable. I have education clients that have kids that go from pre-K to grade 5. I'm currently working with someone who's using this to build a community college framework for low-income students. We've used it at Lumosity to target what were usually older people.
Thank you.
Okay, this gentleman, I think. And then this gentleman and those folks too.
I think your answer to the previous question about the difference, I think is really enlightening. So back to your statement that Slack chose not to use the badges and rewards, is it precisely because they think that the engaging and the learning part of it cannot be achieved by just badges and points and the rewards? And how do we convince the business people to go the learning approach?
What business people?
Meaning my CEO. I'm the VP of products. So.
So, I mean, the thing about Slack is that their North Star was actually collaboration. And so a lot of what Slack didn't do was put zero-sum things that would create a feeling of zero-sum mechanics in their interface, like a leaderboard is a really simple example of a zero-sum mechanic. Just seeing your own stats go up is personal progress. There's nothing wrong with that. But part of why they chose not to put it in is that when they were using it, it wasn't relevant, like when they were first developing it. But Slack actually is having a lot of internal discussions about whether they should have more of that. It's not that they all agree that it shouldn't be there. Some people feel like it would be great to have more competition, but the interesting thing about Slack is, just like with Minecraft, you can then answer that by building an extension. Great, build an extension to have a leaderboard, no problem. But I think good game designers never start with mechanics. And so when you say, how do you convince your CEO? It's like, most of the people that show up on my doorstep that I work with, many of them have been down the road of trying to just sprinkle mechanics onto something and thinking there's magic in mechanics because somebody sold them a bill of goods. And when they find out that there's not, then they say, maybe there's a different approach. So What I've learned is people sometimes just need to do it for themselves. And sometimes, if you're just doing like some simple onboarding and you're trying to get people to fill out a profile, a few mechanics might be all you need. But if you're trying to build a compelling experience that drives long-lasting engagement, that's not going to cut it. So it depends on what you're trying to build. There was some more?
Yeah, I have. Sorry. My question is that sometimes there's this philosophy of requesting your user to do the minimum. So you want to cater to lazy customers, meaning that within just 3 minutes or 5 minutes, they can get to where they, you can cater the information to them. So I'm just wondering, for this type of users and this kind of philosophy, how do you design the core loop?
It's completely contextual. I mean, there's no global answer to what you said. When you design a core loop, you're designing it contextually to what you're doing. So you say, what's the need or internal trigger? What's the engaging activity? What's the rudimentary form of feedback that you're going to give to let people know they're on the right track? And then what is the investment system that's going to drive people to continue to want to come that makes the thing better? So when you say there's this idea that people should just have 3 to 5 minutes, well, I've probably worked on 20 or 30 games. Some games, that's perfect. That's just right. 3 to 5 minutes is perfect for a mobile game, turn-based mobile game or something like that. But it might be different for something else. So, I mean, this is orthogonal to that question. It's just that question is like, there's no general rule for how long things should be. You have to answer it in the context of what you're doing and what people are trying to do. There's a lot of situations where a half-hour experience is the right thing to develop. Depends on what you're doing.
Hi, I'm Joe. So I'm here, back here. Thanks, I really enjoyed your talk. Oftentimes people talk about like the core loop in game design, and they talk about the extended game loop. So can you talk about, like, in the context of what you said here, how you're thinking about the extended game loop?
Well, people use these terms in really different ways, just like people use the term gamification in different ways. In general, in gaming, a core loop, I presented something that's quite a bit simplified from what most real game core loops look like. And usually it's a little mini economy where you are purchasing something and you're building something and you're then have some engagement, which might be cooperative or competitive. Clash of Clans is a great example. You build up your base and your armies, and then you go attack, and then you get revenge, and there's this back and forth thing. Build, spend, attack, revenge, build more. That's the core loop of Clash of Clans. And I've written about that on my blog. The core loop of Twitter is sort of like with Slack. It's like, check in, read your updates, maybe see, read a few different updates, check your stats, And what are you getting better at on Twitter? That's the feedback system. And the feedback system, you get better at writing coherently in 140 characters. That's exactly what you're getting better at Twitter. And part of why Twitter is a little bit game-like is because there's this constraint. And what makes games interesting are their constraints. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
So you spoke a lot about startups. Startups are great. They have a lot of energy. They don't have a lot of legacy. But I noticed one company on your list that was very different from that, the New York Times. I'm wondering if you can talk at all about the experience working with them.
Sure. Do you work for a larger company?
I work for, well, not so much a larger company, but a content delivery company that's been around for a number of years, and we definitely have history and legacy.
Sure. I have worked with quite a few larger companies like Telstra and Tesco and Disney and the New York Times. But I'll speak to the New York Times in particular. That was a really challenging engagement. I helped them design their paywall. I helped them design what was beyond the paywall when they were first putting the paywall up. In other words, we're going to have a service. What's it going to be? So that was the project. And bunch of good work. We did some really nice design work that kind of got shoved aside. But one of the things we worked on that took off on that project was elevating readers who were really good at making really good comments, elevating them. Perhaps some of you have seen in the last few years, the New York Times has started to make those people special and give them special, like their posts have special placement. So it's blurring the boundary between the readers and the editors and writers. And that was one of the projects in that, which was, they're very valuable to you, you should do it. The challenge of that was that there was what was called, I think, the Big Eight or something. There were these 8 executives who ran the New York Times who had to approve everything. So during my project, I presented to them 3 times. And, I think Jill Abramson, she was one of them. And they never smiled, ever. But it was hard to do anything risky. Their tolerance for risk was very low. It all worked out. It turned out the things we did were core system things. Like we designed a lot of stuff that inspired people, and then a few core system elements that made it in really helped them succeed. But it was, there were a lot of stakeholders. And that's a reality of that was the same at Disney, but more so. Maybe have any of you ever worked for Disney? Okay, maybe you know what I'm talking about. So, yes, this lady back there.
Hi, Amy Jo. Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
I had a question about, does your advice change at all for B2B products where the users didn't necessarily have a choice in terms of what product they used? So trying to engage your users when they didn't actually opt in to utilizing it in the first place.
So I have done quite a bit of B2B work, but it's mostly been where people did have a choice. It wasn't, in general, I haven't worked on projects where something was being shoved down people's throats. I've worked on projects that had an engagement issue, that needed to stand on their own engagement. But I did do a really interesting, I coached a really awesome startup through a B2B idea. And there was a really interesting difference in that from some of our consumers that I can share with you, which is that we, in our program, our Getting to Alpha program, we coach people and give them a lot of tools to do very fast, highly targeted customer insights research that's really testing your hypotheses about who the right early customers are to talk to. And in order to do that, you have outreach issues. And sometimes you want to tell people you're doing paid studies and that's the way to bring them in. Sometimes you want to tell people that, they can help make the idea great and that brings them in. There's different ways to bring people in. And in the enterprise, it was really tricky because this client was talking to pretty high-level people that, CEOs and VPs, and they didn't want to be paid. It was like their time was really valuable. So we had to work together to really get her outreach materials just right so she could get the insights and interviews she needed from these really high-level CEOs. So there was definitely some copywriting and spin there, and I learned a lot because once we got it right, they all said yes. And they were all like, we would love to talk to you. So you just basically appeal to their ego. But what was great about that one was something happened that happens a lot, which is that during the course of this research, she hit what I call her alpha moment, which is where you get the feedback you need to know if you're on to something or like way off. And the earlier you get that, the more time and money you save. So she was building actually a data importing tool to integrate with like a SaaS data importing and massaging tool. And she was pitching to all these CEOs of consulting companies that specialize in that about partnering with them and getting like really weird feedback. And it finally hit her one day that like they all said, well, I want to buy your tool. She's like, no, it's a service. You can't buy the tool. Well, I want to buy your company. No, you can't buy the company. She finally realized that all these people that she was pitching to were looking at her as a competitor because her tool would let her undercut them by half. And so she went, oh, my audience is not who I thought it was. So she started pitching their clients, which of course, that's delicate. And then it went so well that she quit her job, and now she's doing that full time as a startup. But she went through this real change. I call it the dark night of the soul of an entrepreneur, where you get your beautiful idea in front of people and you go, oh shit, my baby is ugly, or oh my God, I'm really onto something, and I have to disrupt my life and quit my job, and am I ready for a startup? I mean, it can be either of those things. The key is you get real input that you got with methods that you can't brush off. And that's the moment that separates real entrepreneurs, whether you're in a corporation, because entrepreneurs are awesome. I work with a lot of them. But that moment where you actually say, I care more about product market fit than ego, is a really important moment.
Hi, Mary Jo. I'm in SaaS customer success and support area, and I wonder your framework and the concepts that you shared could be also applied for better, faster, better service design.
Absolutely. In fact, most of the stuff I do is service design, the New York Times, MMOs. So absolutely, I'd say give it a shot, because service, anything that has some underlying systems and anything that wants to drive long-term engagement is going to benefit the most. So for service design, obviously you want to drive unless you're talking about super short-term services. But if you're trying to drive retention, it's extremely relevant.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts about what you think about social network or massive multiplayer games, where perhaps at scale the core loop is very evident from once the network effect has kicked in. But how about at the very early stage? What would the core loop looks like for really early adopters? Where, why would you tweet when when you're the first guy signing up to Twitter?
So the first people that were tweeting on Twitter were classic, like Robert Scoble, right? People that are just always wanting the new stuff. But here's a really example, Minecraft. If you go on YouTube, you can see a video of Minecraft in its alpha build. Nobody would think it would turn into anything. But there were people who were interested in it, who played it, super fans. So that's an example. That's the thing is, getting to alpha, getting to a successful product is a mix of having some vision for where you want to go and then iterating your way there. There were a lot of things that Marcus Pearson wanted to do with Minecraft he didn't end up doing. He kind of followed where people wanted to go. But the first versions of Rock Band were incredibly ugly. It would have been humiliating to show them to you. But we found people who could give us good feedback anyway. I don't know if that answers your question.
Two last questions.
Okay.
You got it, unless we're done.
Oh.
Ian. Yeah, wait for the mic.
So I work for a news aggregator, and sort of I'm trying to think about what the core loop is. I mean, people win when they find good information. What they do with it could be any number of things. Just as applied, you worked at the New York Times. What is an experience that we could focus on?
There's a lot of different ways to frame it. Did you ever see Yahoo News?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's an interesting core loop. It's gamified, but I think with a light touch, so there's different core loops. With the New York Times, one of the things we struggled with the most was the core loop. We definitely didn't have agreement, because there's a lot of, we didn't have the luxury in that of going after the early adopters so much, except that we then shifted to the people who were really good commenters as early adopters. And we actually got great insights from them. The core loop that the New York Times ended up embracing in our engagement, that I don't think they stuck with, though, because remember, these things change over time, was a completion. It was sort of a completionist core loop. So it was one of the things they said is, our most loyal readers, they just really care about reading every article. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, really. So we're going to have this little mechanism where they can make sure it's completionist, right? almost like a collecting mechanism of collect them all, like with Pokemon, but with reading every article. As I said, I'm not sure they stuck with it. But I think the thing about a core loop with a news aggregator site is the more that you know, if those of you who have the handout, if you look in there, there's a research question I gave to you for free, which is an awesome research question, which is tell me about your day. Tell me about your habits. Tell me, tell me about your day as it's relevant. So with news readers, it's just like, when do they read it? How do they read it now? The core loop comes out of actually knowing how what you're doing fits into your customers' existing habits. Not every core loop can be that way, but like with Rock Band, what we learned from all our early research was, people come home, or usually it was like, people are going to have a party, and so they like set up the room, and then they have the instruments, and then they have the chips. We had this whole scenario of when do you play Rock Band? And what it did was it fit into people's existing entertainment habits. It was on a Saturday night, it was in a living room, or it was in the bottom of a frat, or there's a lot of colleges in Boston, so we got a lot of user testing in frats, and which was actually really useful because if those people can play and have a good time, So was there one more question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. So does the core loop ever change? And if you see that your users are sort of changing their behavior or moving towards something else, is it time to sort of try to expand your core loop or just build like a new product altogether?
That's a great question. So, yes. Your core loop can change, and usually it does. And in reality, if you're building an interesting system, your core loop is actually a set of interlocking systems, not just a single loop. That's a simplified model. And design to evolve absolutely applies to the core loop. Now, if you have a solid core loop, though, you don't want to just go abandoning it willy-nilly, because what's the core loop of Rock Band? It's actually the same. It's playing a song. It's the same. It has not changed because it's so fundamental to the experience. It's, in a sense, it's the atomic unit. So you want to be, and if you think about Mario games, how many of you have ever played a Mario game? I just love Mario games. So those, what's the core loop there? It's like run and jump and explore, and it's very, very simple and very kind of visceral. Get a coin if you're playing in a 2D one. And there's an element that even today's 3D awesome Mario games on the Wii U still have that same core loop, that same fun in them. So once you find a good core loop, you can really leverage the hell out of it. But yeah, if it's going to change, eBay is a great example. So I worked with eBay from when they were 30 people to when they were 300 people, so very early. And things changed a lot. The core loop went from being an auction to a buy it now. That's a big change. And I saw that. So, and that was Meg, that was, we got to grow. We got to, turn into more of a marketplace and less of a fun and games place. So there's an example.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amy Jo, for an awesome talk with lots
Thanks
of great
for coming.
advice.